how to write articles that will attract 1 million views on Medium. This is exactly what we are going to talk about on today's episode. But before getting started, if you've been following me for a while, you know my stance on vanity metrics. Likes, views, shares, subscribers, all these are not a direct path to revenue. So there are many creators who have millions of followers, millions of views, but don't know how to monetize their audience effectively. They have no system. They don't know exactly what to do. As a result, they sell their results to advertisers, right? And others, like myself, I don't have a large Medium audience. I don't have millions of views on my articles, and I don't have the largest email list either. But I have a system to monetize it effectively. So all this to say is that you really don't need to be famous in order to hit 5 figures a month creating content. But that being said, vanity metrics can be bloody useful on a psychological level because they give you one thing, confidence. And that's, something a lot of people lack, and they are simply trapped in imposter syndrome. They're constantly second guessing themselves, and it paralyzes them from moving forward. But when you have a piece that lifts off, right, it shows that what you have to say interests people, right? So from that standpoint, vanity metrics can help because they give you this kind of external validation that you might need to simply feel more confident, which actually brings me to today's episode. Because in today's episode, I have a great conversation with my colleague, Scott Stockdale from Medium. So Scott had a handful of pieces that blew up on Medium. And what I did is I simply put him on the grill to extract his best viral writing tips out of his brain. So there are a lot of gems on this episode. And without any further, let's get started. Scott, welcome to the show.
Matt, thank you so much for having me. I've been super looking forward to this.
I'm glad to have you here. I'm really excited. Before we actually dive deeper into your writing process, could you give the audience a little bit more background about who you are and what you're currently doing, and perhaps also talking a little bit about your current business? So what you're actually doing to make money?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been writing online for the last sort of 4 to 5 years and transitioned about 2 years ago into full-time self-employment. So being a freelance writer full-time. So I've been doing that for the last 18 months to 2 years. And then I do all sorts of things online. So I have various digital products, affiliates, and partnerships with companies. And I'm currently in the process of building out a community called the Committed Writers Club, which is currently at 14 members, hoping to grow that to about 60 members by the end of the year. So all of that combined, that's basically how I keep busy day to day.
Awesome. So Scott, I remember stumbling across one of your articles on Medium. And if I'm not mistaken, it was the one where you, I think the first one was like Reddit's had a facelift. And this has crazy engagements, almost 10,000 claps, 190 comments, which is kind of insane a bit. Then I think that then it was the second one, which was like just a few months after, right? It was like the first one, I think you published that in June. The other one was in October. You're wasting your time trying to build an audience was the title. Over 12,000 claps, 209 comments. And yeah, I mean, like you just have this, I think you have a rock solid process to actually write articles that, get a lot of engagement. So even though views might not say, everything, same for the claps and for the comments. However, like I know that, writing these kind of articles helped you get, some traction, help you build your list. So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, they were two articles you pointed out did really well. And I've been quite fortunate. There's been a lot of articles I've written over the years that have, for whatever reason, blown up. Like my first viral article was about 3 months after I started writing on Medium back in 2021. And that was about how to make money from Udemy courses. And I think that's just under 100,000 views to date. And then, another one about Peter Levels, who's like an entrepreneur who's making thousands of dollars a month online. So yeah, there's been a bunch of them, and I think there's no like. I wish there was a secret that I had, but a lot of it is just a case of really trying to get clear on the title, like what is it you're trying to say in the article, and then basically just delivering on that. So, take you're wasting your time trying to build an audience. That's quite deliberately, poking the bear, so to speak. Like I know
Mhm.
that's provoke a reaction, but I do find, or at least in the article, I try to give some like valid points as to why I think that's actually true. Like you don't need an audience, and a lot of creators and writers who are trying to build an audience are effectively wasting their time. Like there is a better route into that, and that's kind of what the article is about. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's
So,
my
so, so I really want to dissect. Like you just scratch the surface with getting clear on the article, on the title, blah blah. Yeah, no. I'm going to I want you to dissect that even further. But before doing that, I had a question because like Medium doesn't really show how many articles you have on the platform. So yeah, you had a handful of articles that really had blown up, right?
yeah.
But like, if we actually put this into perspective with the numbers of articles you've actually written, can you give us some kind of do you could you recall like how many articles you've posted versus how many articles actually brought in like
Yeah,
these crazy amount
absolutely.
of views?
Yeah, I think to date I've published just over 300 articles in about
Okay.
4 years maybe. So not like a crazy amount. I kind of average
Uh-huh.
like one or two a week, if that.
Yeah.
During some writing sprints, I've done like a lot more, so it's more like daily. But I've only done two of those writing sprints. So yeah, typically I'm not like churning out a huge amount of content, but certainly the first like 100 articles, barring the one that went viral about Udemy courses, yeah, I wasn't getting like loads and loads of views. It's been a bit of a snowball effect, and even my follower count, I was under 5k followers for at least about 3.5 years, maybe something like that, and then it's only in the last sort of 6 to 12 months that it's kind of gone a bit more, kind of grown a lot more. So yeah, that I guess yeah, like you say, it's good to put these things in perspective because certainly not all my articles go viral. Even now, like I write
Mhm.
articles and they're not always taking off. So yeah, definitely good to have that context.
So that's interesting. So, do you have like kind of an idea of how many of your articles got this crazy kind of engagement? Like, I recall 3 or 4 articles. Perhaps there might be more than that. But do you have kind of a number when it comes to that?
Yeah, I would say probably yeah, maybe 6 or 7.
Okay.
Um, yeah, so yeah, definitely. Yeah, the Peter. There's also one I've on a publication called Better Marketing. So you likely have $1,000 on your Google Drive. That's
Yes, I remember that one. Yeah, I remember that one. Yeah, yeah,
yeah. So that's
absolutely.
about 50k views. Another one on the startup, how to create passive and scalable income streams from 6 to 8 p.m. That does
Mhm.
really well. Yeah, there's been a bunch of them. I'd probably say about looking at the stats, there's about a dozen that have just blown up.
Okay. So, like, I just quickly made a calculation when you said like around perhaps 7 articles. Like, if you actually put this into perspective with 300 published articles, that's like 2.3%, which,
Yeah.
which again, like, I remember when I went crazy on YouTube back in 2020, where uh, I simply wanted to grow my channel. Obviously, I wanted to grow my list and grow my channel, right? And what happened is that um, I didn't get any traction, and then let's say when I went back, let's say perhaps 1 year later or so, I actually saw kind of the same pattern. I don't remember the exact numbers. Wasn't able to like, I know that I made the calculation, but I wasn't just able to get my hands on it. But it was like kind of the same kind of number, right? It's like the videos that actually gathered thousands of views, etc. It was like a handful of, I don't know, 3%, 4%, something like that, right? Which actually brings us to an interesting conclusion. It's like, rarely you have those success stories where you just create, let's say, one piece, and then suddenly you get like thousands and thousands of views, and you can actually build a business around piece of content, right? It's like people see, oh yeah, this writer got
tens of thousands of views on an article. But what they don't see and what they forget is like the 299 other articles that you've written prior to that, right?
Yeah, yeah, it's so well put. And I think also those other articles, those call it 200 plus articles that don't
Mm-hmm.
necessarily blow up, they're still
Mm-hmm.
really valuable because a lot of the time,
Yep.
people who are reading them, not everyone's going to like comment and like an article even if they enjoy it. They're kind of stalking you behind the scenes. You don't always they're not always clear metrics. So yeah, they're
Absolutely.
still really valuable for growing.
Yeah.
Just kind of getting visibility and things.
There is so many things that you can track, and I argue like one of the most important, like you can't really trust, let's say, the perception people have of you and of your brand. You can also really track like the amount of trust that you're building, right? So like, yeah, those visible metrics are an indicator, but they are certainly not like the most important one. And I remember, I think it was last week or 2 weeks ago, someone asked me, hey, what is like, how do you actually, define if this or that content that you put out there is valuable? And like my answer, it was a cold answer. It was like, number one, sales, number two, email subscribers, and then number three, all the other crap, which is like views, shares, blah, 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 right?
Mm-hmm.
However, like one of the interesting things, like I discovered more of your articles because of that, of one of the pieces that actually, went viral, right?
Mm-hmm.
So this, I think it's kind of an entry door, and perhaps 95% of people are not going to, they're just going to read the story and then move on. But like those 5% who are going to go down deep the rabbit hole. Like if you have like this with tens of thousands of people, like that's already like an audience that most creators can be happy with.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Sean Puri, who's like a podcaster I follow, puts it really well. He's like, if you've got like a binge bank that people find after kind of entering that door, then yeah, they're more likely to become lifelong fans because they build that trust so quickly. So yeah, it's well worth putting the time in to kind of have that binge bank and that back catalogue of articles, even if at the time they don't get lots of views and they don't blow up by those metrics. But yeah, the long-term benefits is you'll build that trust and eventually people will, they'll see you enough, they'll find that you're interesting and then join your email list. And then, like you say, you can then sell products and basically focus on the stuff that matters.
Yeah. And like the second interesting thing that you mentioned is like you were stuck at, let's say, 5,000 followers on Medium for most of the time, right? For, let's say you've been writing on that platform for about 4 years, and like right now, at the time, by the time I'm recording this, you have like 16,500 followers, and you've been stuck like you were stuck with 5,000 followers for 95% of the journey. So this is kind of interesting because it's actually kind of the same pattern that I've recognized, across several businesses, like even let's say with clients, is that, hey, at the beginning, you just put in a lot of efforts and you just don't have the feeling that you're growing. And then basically you have this kind of compounding effect that just starts, basically compounding everything. So I recently crossed 5,000 email subscribers on my email list. And like most of the growth, and I started that email list back in 2020, right? I just tried, a bunch of different things that didn't really work out well, but like I just saw that, 80, like most of the growth actually happened within the past, 12 months or so, which means that at the beginning, yeah, like you just need to put in the reps and then just, understand that, hey, at one time things are going to start compounding, and I think like it's kind of the patience that is kind of hard to develop if you never have done this before, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I always say to new writers who ask me like, how do I grow on Medium, or how do I keep writing, what those sorts of questions, I always say like, just write the first 50 articles and don't worry about the metrics. And then once you've done them, send me your 50th article. I will critique you and I'll be able to give you like more tangible feedback. But yeah, I'm yet to receive that 50th article from anyone. And that's not to say someone hasn't done that. Like there might be, but for whatever reason, by that point, writers have probably found their way and they probably know what works and they don't need me to check it. So it's kind of like a filter that's like, yeah, okay, send me your 50th article. But if you actually get to that point, then you probably don't need my help anyway, because you'll figure out what works. So yeah, that's something I try and follow at least.
Interesting. So, okay, now let's get into your writing process. So you mentioned something that, hey, okay, I just start with a headline and I just write something that I think is interesting to me, and then Scott, like we want more details on that. So, question number one, like, how do you ideate? How do you come up with ideas?
Yeah, so my process is basically I try and just capture ideas in the moment. So typically I'll get ideas when I go for walks or before bed and things like that. So on walks, I always have my phone on me, and I'll just basically email myself any things that come up during that walk. So if I'm listening to a podcast, for example, and I hear an interesting quote, then I'll make a note of that on my phone, email it to myself. And then every Sunday I go through all of those emails that I've sent to myself and put them into Notion. So I kind of have like a filter before I then upload them into Notion. Notion just being like a CMS, like Trello or Asana, that sort of thing. And then pretty sporadically, I'll go through Notion and just kind of clear out those ideas or start to join the dots. Or if I've got a quote in there, then I might try and expand on it. And I'm basically, at this point, got like 90 ideas in this Notion dashboard that I can just pull upon when I'm looking to create content. So I'm not having to face that blank page. So those ideas could just simply be, like, say, a quote, or it could be someone that I want to do a deeper dive on, or it could be a book that I want to read. It could literally be anything. It could even just be a picture of like something like a quote or a passage in a book I found interesting. So yeah, that's kind of how I ideate. And then when it comes to actually writing the articles, I spend a good chunk of time just trying to come up with a good headline, because as you know, like, unless you've got a good headline, your article's just not getting any views. Like, no one's going to read it. So I probably spent, if I was to put it in like a pie chart, I'd say that 80% of my time is probably spent on the headline. So I'll typically write like 5 to 10 variations of a headline before I even start writing the article. And if I can't get a good headline, I might just leave it for a while, or I might just decide, actually, there's not enough here. Like, even though it's an interesting idea, there's not enough there to actually write an article about it. And I could turn it into like a LinkedIn post instead, or I don't really use Twitter anymore, but you could turn it into a tweet, something like that. So yeah, 80% of the time on the headline, and then trying to find a good image. And I don't go crazy on this. Like, I know you could use AI or Mid-Journey, something like that. I've experimented a little bit with that, but to be honest, I just find really fairly good images on Pixels and those sorts of websites.
Do you mind? Could you just pause right here?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, great. So first of all, like, the ideation is, totally agree with you, and that's something that we brought up several times on the podcast when I talk to other creators, like how they ideate. It's, I rarely get any ideas in front of my computer. Like, I think I don't get perhaps less than 1% of my ideas when I'm in front of a computer. I think like there is something to the screen that actually just sucks out your creativity. I don't know, like, I'm not don't have any proof if we can back this up in terms of neuroscience whatsoever. However, like, I feel that ideation actually happens, as you mentioned, when you're doing something else, like you mentioned going on a walk, etc. So that way of saving your ideas and catching the ideas as you have them actually then makes the rest way easier. Then you mentioned like the headline process, and like just something that you just mentioned very, very quickly, but like you spent you mentioned like you spend 80% of your time on the headline.
Yeah, I would say that. When I think about particularly the articles that have done really well, I'd say it's a case of like, even down to what sort of grammar will I use in a headline. Will I use like a hyphen, because I find that those tend to, for whatever reason, I don't know the science, but they tend to get more clicks, or odd numbers. If you can throw an odd number in there. I've read various, and you've probably seen these same case studies, but odd numbers are seen as like brain candy, and for whatever reason, people find them more truthful, which is why you see, say, on BuzzFeed, you'll get like 63 reasons why X, or those sorts of headlines. So yeah, it's literally down to like individual words a lot of the time. Like, can I just change this word? How does it look on the screen? Like,
Yeah.
is that something that is clickable? Like, does it get cut off? These really, I guess, kind of slightly obsessive details, but and I don't even know if you need to go to that level, to be honest. Like, I know a lot of writers I've spoken to, they kind of just get a gut sense of whether a headline is any good. But yeah, I do spend a lot of time on the headlines because the most important thing.
And that's interesting. Like, do you have any kind of outline before working on the headline? So, like, when you are working on the headline, are you also thinking about the angle, refining the angle, or like, do you pretty much have, let's say, no, I know exactly what I'm going to talk about. It's going to be, let's say, like right now in front of me, I have this article which is like, put out content, build an email list, sell a product. Why isn't it working for you? Not a headline is like, you're wasting your time trying to build an audience. There is a better way to get everything you want. Like, do you already have, like, how does the process look like in terms of writing the headline itself and coming up with the angle of your article?
Yeah, I wish I could say there was more of a thought process behind it, but there really isn't. Some of my best performing articles are headlines that have just kind of come fairly naturally, and I find actually it's the ones that I kind of agonize over that typically don't do as well. So take the one about putting out content, selling. I can't remember exactly what it is, but
Put out content, build an email list, sell a product. Why isn't it working for you?
Exactly. Yeah. So take that headline there. That first part of it came fairly quickly, the bit that's in quotes. So kind of that triptych. And then it was kind of a case of jiggling about that second part that came after the hyphen and then the subtitle. I should say as well, the subtitle is also, I think, really important and often overlooked. And I find that ones that are quite short subtitles tend to do pretty well. Like, it's more, I try not to give the game away too much in the headline. It's just a case of like, trying to get someone's curiosity without basically telling them what the article's about. So, most of my best performing headlines are kind of raising a question and getting people thinking. And, they want to learn, I suppose, what are the things that the headline's promising. So, yeah. I know it's not the most satisfying answer, but I have tried. Believe me, I've tried a bunch of things. I've tried like can't say that word, templatizing headlines and trying to follow certain codes and things. But for me, they don't really work for me.
I think this can be a crutch when you're just getting started, just to kind of, be kind of a guiding compass so that okay, like this is where I'm going, right? But then, it's not kind of I don't think it's kind of a precise science, because like one of the things that you mentioned is like, sometimes you tend to agonize over a headline, and then you see that those that came naturally to you perform better. So I think there's kind of a fine line between doing things right, and perhaps trying to I don't know, trying to stick too much to the hard rules. So I think like this, as you mentioned, like piquing curiosity, not revealing what you're actually going to say in the article, is key to get people clicked. And as long as you are within those boundaries, you're likely going to be safe. And that's why copywriters and marketers, they always A/B test things, right? They test one thing versus another, and then you might have a gut feeling this is going to perform better, but honestly, you don't really know unless you put it out there. And like, I remember, like one of the articles that got me thousands of views, tens of thousands of views on Medium, like are simple, like you're wasting or you're taking notes the wrong way. Yeah, as you mentioned, like it really makes people think. And then like, why? And then you're just clicking and just reading the article. Another one was like, if nobody's reading, or if nobody's reading your writing, something like that, you're on the right way, right? It's like, oh, what's going on? Like, you say nobody's reading my stuff, and I'm on the right way. So yeah, I think it's like, you don't want to overcomplicate too much, as long as you are within those boundaries. Like, pique curiosity, talk to the reader, use words that he's familiar with. You're likely going to be on the safe side.
100%. Yeah, I find like a really helpful exercise is just to follow people you admire and see what they're doing in the headlines. And it doesn't have to be a case of, studying them word for word and going through all their content. But whenever you see someone that you admire pop up on your feed and you want to click that article, just take a second to think, oh, what is it about this headline that makes me want to click? And that's a really helpful, I do that all the time, even now. It's a really helpful exercise.
Absolutely. So now comes okay, so now you actually nailed you nailed your angle and your headline. Do you actually start writing your first draft, or do you first start outlining, or perhaps it's more kind of it really depends on the pieces? Like, how do you approach that?
Yeah, it really does depend on the pieces. So the more personal stories that I've kind of just let build up inside my body for a while, they come very naturally and I can just bash them out pretty quickly. But the pieces that require a bit more research, particularly the deep dives on creators, take like the Peter Levels article, that took literally like 2 months of research and going through all his tweets and all his newsletters and those sorts of things and put it into a Google Doc. So it really does depend on what it is I'm trying to get out of an article. Like, is it a case of I want to really inform the reader about a particular topic and make sure that, I'm not missing any points? Or is it a case of actually I just want to tell a personal story and just update readers on a particular thing that's going on in my life? So they're two very different articles, and they can be quite jarring. Like, it's one of my friends, because she reads my articles and I read hers, and something she said to me quite recently was, don't you ever think about, like, when you're going from, say, a piece about entrepreneurship to then take a recent article I did about my biological dad's passing away. Like, those are two very, very different articles and have two very different audiences. And when she said that, I was like, oh, actually, it could be quite jarring. But luckily on Medium, you can put them in different publications and they get in front of different audiences. So I don't worry about that too much. But to answer your question, my process, it does depend on each article, but what typically will happen is I'll have those ideas in Notion and then I'll just flesh them out a little bit. So I'll put like some bullet points, have a rough idea of what I want to say in the introduction, because that's really important. And then just take it from there. Just let the fingers type away, see what comes out. Basically, that's kind of the process.
Okay. How do you find a motivation to, let's say, go on a 2-month research phase where, let's say, you're writing an article? Like, honestly, like, if you don't like for me or for anyone else who might be listening to this, like this guy is crazy, like putting 2 months of research on a piece that he has absolutely no guarantee that it's going to perform well, right? And that there's going to be an ROI. So, like, how do you find that motivation, or let's say that power to that fuel?
Yeah, so typically with those deep dives on creators that take a huge amount of research, I'm kind of confident at this stage because I've done so many of them and I see that they actually perform quite well. I'm pretty confident that they will generally perform quite well. And that's not to say they always do, but 9 times out of 10, they do at least kind of give me that sense that people have read them and that, they get lots of engagement. So for one, that's something. But the other thing that's probably more important is I use those articles as an excuse to reach out to those creators. And it's happened a bunch of times. So it's a little bit I guess it kind of makes sure that my downside is capped a little bit, because regardless of what happens with the article, I know I can then reach out to that creator and say, hey, I wrote this article about you, no pressure to check it out, but I think you might like it. And 9 times out of 10, again, those creators will then reach out to me, can start a conversation. And if I wanted to, potentially, offer my freelancing services, or at the very least, just kind of get connected with someone I really admire. So it's kind of a win-win once I kind of frame it like that. And it, basically caps my downside because, there's a good chance that some of these articles don't perform well, but at the same time, I've built a new connection with someone who I really admire. So that's kind of how I think about it. That's kind of what motivates me. But also I just find them really interesting to write. Like, I wouldn't do these articles if I didn't enjoy writing them, because it would be so painful. But I do just genuinely find digging into people's stories so interesting. And, take Peter Levels, who's like been tweeting for like the last decade, and he's just such an interesting guy. So it was just a pleasure going through all of his tweets and kind of, going through his content. So yeah, that's how I think about it, really.
Yeah, that's really, really interesting and really, really smart, I have to say. So yeah, congrats on that. Congrats on coming up with such an interesting process. So what I usually do when, let's say I'm honestly not writing those kind of articles, I definitely see the value in those articles, and like the fact that you use those articles to then reach out to the creator is definitely a very smart move. Usually how I like to do things, it's like, if let's say there is someone that I enjoy, let's say reading or reading from or listening to, what I do is like, I just listen to or consume the content, take notes, right? And then since like I've built this kind of note-taking system where everything is linked. Let's say tomorrow I want to write a piece about Robert Greene, right, or something like that. All I have to do is I simply open my notes. I open the Robert Greene note and then simply look at, all the notes that I've taken to point back to that. And here I already have my article, right? It's kind of a, yeah, I'm already consuming that. And, perhaps I will have something by, within three days, perhaps three, if I'm really binge consuming, a lot of content, or perhaps it might be in 3 months, or perhaps it might be in 3 years, right? But it's already there. So this is how I'm approaching this, and yeah, I think it's just kind of another way to actually do that. But yeah,
that sounds like a good approach. Doing it all in one go, rather than like chunking it down too much. Just like bite the bullet and do that binge dive.
I think it really comes back to like what is like kind of your current mindset and your current motivation, right? Sometimes you're just binge consuming a lot of things at the same time might make sense. Sometimes it just doesn't, and at least having those two approaches, I think is very, very smart. It's kind of a smart thing to have in your toolbox. So in terms of your introductions, so we all know, or at least we all know people who are writing on on Medium or on Substack or the platforms that are more geared towards long form social content. That number one, the headline, obviously, then the subheader, image, might help a bit, but you can actually get away with a crappy image when you have a great title. But then comes the intro, right? Tell us more about your introduction writing process, even if you don't have one. Like, I just want to understand how Scott actually thinks about the intro.
Yeah, so look, I've kind of connected the dots on my intros a few months ago to kind of understand them better myself. Like, okay, which articles that I write do pretty well? Like, what's the kind of commonalities? So I'll give you a few. So I typically have like 4 different types of introductions, and they're all very short. We're kind of talking like a couple of scrolls, if that, on the screen. So the first type of intro is basically just like dropping someone into the action. So you can think of it like the one that springs to mind for me. So I wrote an article about me and my ex, who's also a writer, meeting after 11 months of dating. And the article starts where I'm literally like waiting for her at the airport.
At the airport. Yeah. I remember that.
You remember that one? Yeah. So that's kind of like dropping someone into the action. And I just got that from like all the fiction books I've read. Like, that's a lot what the best writers tend to do, rather than having like too much preamble. So you can kind of drop someone into the action, and then once they're kind of invested a little bit and they kind of want to know what's going on, then you can kind of backtrack and kind of introduce a bit of context. So that's kind of the first one for kind of stories.
Do you mind me reading that piece so that listeners can get a little bit more context on how?
Absolutely.
It was like, I lean onto the barrier. We've done the whole Zoom dates thing, but meeting in person, this was next level stuff. My heart was doing somersaults. There she is. That's her. And if you want to read the full piece, we're going to link that in the show notes. But yeah, it's really like the first sentence is really short. I lean onto the barrier. So what's going on, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of an extend, it continues the headline. It's like, okay, like, yeah, exactly that. What's going on kind of raises that curiosity, I guess.
Yep. And then like that's one of your introductions. You mentioned you have more.
Sorry, yeah. So yeah, the second type would be an interesting statistic or quote. So again, one here that comes to mind is the article about your Google Drive and how you probably have $1,000 on that, or something along those lines for the headline. And basically, I read another writer talking about how their Google Drive was filled with value, and I kind of basically just took what this guy had said and then included that as a quote in the intro, and then it kind of went from there. So yeah, I remember that piece. People kind of looking for examples. So the original author had like given quite a fluffy answer to that. What was actually a really good headline from him. But I saw that people in the comments were kind of begging for examples, basically. So I was like, okay, there's a gap here. Something quite interesting, and that's kind of how that came to be. So yeah, second type, basically interesting quote or a statistic. Another example would be the Reddit article. So I kind of start the article with a question. It's like, guess how many people are on Reddit or something along those lines.
Yep. It's like, guess how many monthly users Reddit has.
Exactly. And it's like, because I want to kind of basically give a bit of context before I start talking about Reddit, because for a lot of writers, they think, oh, Reddit's like, and no one goes on Reddit. It's like such an indie platform. But actually, when you compare it to the numbers of the other social media platforms, you realize that the numbers are in the same ballpark. So that was kind of where I was going with that intro. So yeah, those are the two types. And then the third type, as I'm trying
is the fourth type. Like you mentioned, story, statistic, or a quote, and then a question. So I think it's the fourth one.
Fourth type. What would the fourth type be? I might have to quickly
double check.
Yeah, because I've got it in my notes. Here we go. Yeah. It's come back to me now. I've got it now. Sorry about that, man.
No worries.
So yeah, then the fourth type of headline would be basically, fourth type of intro would basically be explaining an interesting story about someone. And this is where, I'm doing the deep dives on creators and kind of just giving them a bit of context as to why their story is worth kind of talking about. So a good example would be an article I wrote about
the Peter story.
Yeah, exactly. The Peter story. He'd be a good example.
Peter is the OG of digital nomads. He's a serial entrepreneur who's amassed over 432,000 followers on Twitter and built startups from just his laptops.
Exactly.
Just his laptop, yeah.
Yeah, there you go. So it kind of just grabs people's attention and, it kind of makes them realize, okay, this guy's worth paying attention to and therefore probably worth learning more about him. So, yeah, those are the four main types of intros that I use. Yeah.
Very, very interesting. So, yeah, I mean, if people want to reverse engineer those introductions, I'm going to put those in the show notes, so that because they are really good. So yeah. Okay, so then let's say you're writing the piece. What does your process looks like between the first draft and the edits? Perhaps there are no edits. Like, walk us through the process.
Yeah, so I typically leave an article to rest for like a day or two. So I'll finish the draft and then just leave it in my drafts for a day or two. Come back to it with fresh eyes, and then start the editing process. And my editing isn't crazy. Like there might be obviously typos and things are the obvious things, but in terms of actually like changing, removing certain parts of the story or whatever, I tend not to do that too much because I try and do that whilst I'm writing it. So, for example, if there's a section that doesn't quite make sense where it is, I'll move it during that kind of writing process as opposed to the editing. So it's a little bit convoluted, but yeah, basically the most important thing is just giving it a day or two to just rest and then come back to it with fresh eyes. And I find that's the most important thing with the editing. And obviously the intro as well. So that's something I really kind of narrow in on during the editing process, just making sure that's as kind of tight as possible. And make sure as well that the headline makes sense with the story, because it might have changed. So, I might have to tweak the headline a little bit to make sure it kind of delivers on what it's promising in the article. But yeah, that's basically it, to be honest. Nothing crazy.
Do you sometimes overthink editing? Like, do you spend yourself, looking at perhaps your stopwatch, or just, looking, hey, I spend too much time editing. Let's just kick it out of the door.
Yeah, not really, to be honest, because I just think that editing is going to take as long as it takes. So I don't set any time frame on it. I don't know. I kind of just try not to think about it too much, I guess. But equally, if I'll know myself if a story needs a lot of work and I'm kind of willing to do that. I try not to ship stuff that's not quite at my level, but equally there will be times where I'm just like, yeah, screw it, let's just publish it. I don't care too much. So yeah, I try and I guess have that level, but not always the case.
Okay. One of the things that we didn't really mention is that, like you mentioned that at the beginning of the episode, where you mentioned that you're kind of a freelance writer, and I'm curious, like, do you use Medium right now to find clients, or is it just something that you do quote unquote on the side?
Yeah, it's mainly quote unquote on the side. Like, I've been very lucky that a lot of my articles have actually attracted attention from people looking to hire writers. Typically because Medium articles actually feature really well in Google, but also, I'll publish them on LinkedIn, things like that, so people kind of have an idea of what I write. So yeah, I surprisingly get a lot of inbound now. I don't really do a huge amount of outbound. And what I mean by inbound is like people will just either slide into my DMs on LinkedIn or they'll shoot me an email after contacting me on my website. So yeah, I just find Medium, I mean, the main thing for me, I just enjoy writing. It's just like my hobby as well as the thing I do for work. So that's my main reason. But it is also a great portfolio. Like you can just, even if I was to apply for jobs, I can then say, okay, I've written about these sorts of pieces before on Medium and they've got X amount of views, and you can really back it up with the stats. So it's kind of dual purpose these days, really. Yeah.
That's really interesting, and perhaps one thing I think is underrated when it comes to creating content in any shape or form, right? Might it be on Medium or on any other platform, is that you have this concept where, hey, you already know that your bills are taken care of because you have another income stream, right? So that this actually allows you to really write about stuff that you find interesting in the first place. Whereas I remember when I got started into creating content, is that, yeah, obviously you always have the thing that, hey, I'm writing about something that I'm interested. But when you have this kind of back thought in your head, which is like, yeah, like I would really also like this piece to, let's say, generate X amount of subscribers or X amount of leads or that kind of thing, it kinds of make the process a little bit, can't really say not enjoyable, but you just kind of feel it if people actually really rely on that. And like, I really don't know like how to express that thought right now, but
I totally get what you mean. It kind of detracts from, I guess, purity of it. Maybe is the word. I don't know. Like,
perhaps.
Yeah, I totally get what you're saying. Yeah, I've been there before as well, where content was my main gig for a while, and yeah, I quickly, at the time I went back into a 9-to-5 job, but now obviously freelancing because yeah, like I say, it just takes the pressure off. Like you can then write about things you genuinely enjoy without having to worry about, is a piece going to do really well and bring in lots of money? Like, yeah,
because it really can be really frustrating, right? Like you could study, let's say, the best creators on whatever platform, trying to, buy all their courses, perhaps even get some mentoring or whatsoever, and then at the end you see like, it's actually not working, right? But sometimes it's just like, I think it was Ben Settle who actually first introduced me to this concept. It's like having this kind of, this kind of screw up fund, or I don't remember how exactly he called it. I think it's what, like, screw up fund. It's like, having enough money in the bank so that you can tell yourself, okay, like, I know that I have, let's say, this amount of money, and that I, don't need to be needy, whether it's in my sales page or in anything else that I'm doing, right? And this unconsciously makes the rest way more easier, right? Whereas, like, if, let's say, you're just getting started and you just need, let's say, to quickly build a list or quickly build kind of a following base, it's somehow on a psychological level, really influences, like, the choices, perhaps also the words that you're using, how you present everything, and I think there is some kind of interconnectivity to that. So I just brought this up because, like, that's something that I was really thinking about, even before that interview. So yeah.
Yeah, I like that. It reminds me of something I read a little while ago about a philosopher called Alan Watts, who talked about, I think it's called like the backwards equation, or he coins it something like that, which is basically saying that the more you chase something, the more you want something, the further away it is. And then conversely, the more you kind of just let things go, then you kind of just attract things. Like, and that's not to say it's super woo-woo or The Secret or anything like that. I think, like you said, it's just, for me, it's more the energy that you put out. I think that's what it is. Like, people can sense when you're needy and when you want to close a deal or kind of land a job or whatever. But if you kind of just like, I don't care, like, I don't, I don't need the money for this, then strangely, I think people find that more attractive and you're more likely to get the job. It's really counterintuitive, but yeah, I found that time and time again in my life.
That's awesome. That remembers actually something that I've been doing at the beginning, when writing on Medium. I didn't even enroll to the partner program, right? Because, like, I just had the feeling that, first of all, like, the country I was in wasn't accepted by the partner program, and then second thing is, like, my goal wasn't really to make money on Medium, right? I know that, hey, even let's assume that I'm making $2,000-$3,000 on Medium. Like, I know that I can make 10x of that each month with let's say building my email list, selling my products, selling something else. And the way I've been using Medium is like, hey, I just want to get people on my list, right? I don't really care about making money on Medium, right? And I really don't know if this actually played a role in terms of me getting crazy growth back in 2023. With 2022, 2023, I don't remember exactly like the dates, but like there was a period again where I just grown like crazy. It's sometimes removing money out of the equation and simply having that kind of an income stream, building your thing on the side, is sometimes one of the best ways to simply start getting traction, simply becoming better and enjoying like what you're doing.
Yeah, 1,000%. Yeah.
Scott, is there anything that you want to add? And before we wrap up this call, and you can plug whatever you feel is the right thing to plug.
Yeah, to be honest, I haven't really got anything to plug, but I just encourage people to, if they do want to start writing and there's something stopping them, a couple of things. So you could write under a pseudonym. This is something I've been telling a lot of writers recently. Like, you don't have to publish under your own name particularly if you're publishing something that feels a bit vulnerable or a bit scary. Yeah, just use a false name. That's absolutely fine. But the other thing would be to, just literally, it's the most obvious advice in the world. You're going to hate me for saying it, but just get started. And actually, like I was saying earlier, if you can get to 50 articles, like write your first 50 articles on any platform, doesn't have to be Medium. By that point, you'll get a good sense of what's working for you, what you enjoy writing about, what your tone of voice is, all that sort of stuff. And if you want to send me an article after 50, I would love to receive it. People can find details on my website. But yeah, nothing to plug. Just really enjoyed chatting with you, Matt. I've always enjoyed our chats. So thank you for having me on the show.
Absolutely. So I'm going to plug your website and your lead magnet, whatever you have, in the show notes. I think that listeners are also going to find the articles that we mentioned, and give those articles a read, and reverse engineer it, apply to your writing. I think you're a great writer, and it was great having you on the show. Thank you very much, Scott, for your time, and I hope we'll catch up soon.
Appreciate you, man. Yeah, thanks for your time. Really enjoyed it.
All right, so hope that you've enjoyed this episode. And as always, you're going to find all the links we mentioned in the show notes. And if you're a content creator or want to become one and want to monetize your knowledge online, then be also sure to check out my free emails, because in my daily emails, you're going to learn how you can speed up your content creation workflow to create more content faster and thus attract more clients online in less time. It's the first link in the description. Thank you very much for tuning in today, and I see you next week.